be introducing D.M. Pulley, and I just got done reading her book, The Unclaimed Victim. And I'm looking at my notes here because I have so many notes on her. But anyway, I had gotten this book because it had come up on a historical fiction list, I guess we want to call it, on Amazon. So I got the book and oh my goodness, this book is such a ride. Okay. I did not realize, I thought it was going to be like this little historical fiction book that, set in Cleveland. It's about some murders, unsolved murders, but, it was crazy. Two timelines, two different women, 60 years apart. It's crazy good and scary. And I say good scary because I'm not really into scary too much, but I will be talking to her all about how scary it really was. And I can't wait to meet her. So, here we go with DM Pulley. Hi everyone, I am so excited to be speaking with author D.M. Pulley and her newest book, which is her third book, and I'm going to pull it up because I got it on my Kindle, is The Unclaimed Victim. And there we go, that's a great picture of the door because I was trying to get that, for everybody to see. So anyway, thank you so much for talking with me today, Dee.
Oh, thanks for having me. I've never done a Skype interview. I'm excited.
Well, I'll call you D instead of DM because it's kind of short. But anyway,
That's fine.
I love historical fiction. Okay, I'm a huge historical fiction, and so this book popped up as historical fiction, right? And little did I know it is the thriller like that. It is. Oh my god. I was like reading and listening to this book, and then I'm like, Everybody needs to calm down. And I'd have to walk away from it. Sometimes I was like, okay, Kindle, you're in timeout for an hour until I can gather. Because I am very sensitive. A lot of people would probably be like, oh, that's so stupid. I can read, Stephen King in the middle of the night with all the lights off. And, but I am not that person.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, no, there's lots of readers that are right on the edge with this book as to if it's too much. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure, first of all, I think you were going for that. I mean, I think it's the ultimate compliment when you're a thriller writer to say that somebody had to be like, okay, because I would get to the end of a chapter and then you'd like stick in something and I was like, and then I'd like hold up the down. Because it builds and it builds and it all starts out. Here's how I like to put it, and I don't give spoilers, so no worries. But it all starts out with just a little murder mystery.
It's a little one. A dismemberment and general murder, yes.
Yeah, but but then it builds into this bigger and witchcraft and all kinds of stuff. So anyway, but I loved. Okay, so. Just for everybody there, it's written in two different timelines, okay, which I love. I always love different timelines. Even though I always get like upset. I'm like, no, stick with this person. But no, stick with I'm like, oh, I don't want to go back to that time yet. I'm not ready. But that's also a compliment because that's where you want everybody to be. And you did a really good job with that because I wanted to hear Ethel's story and then I wanted to go back to Chris's story. Like I wanted, and you did it beautifully. Beautifully.
Thanks. I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, I love the way two storylines can play off of each other. That a story from the past can kind of influence the reader and the mood and even have parallels with what's happening in the present.
Yes. And I became so attached to both of them, but I loved Chris's character. That she...
Yeah.
I really became attached to her.
She was she's close to my heart. She was very much inspired by my sister.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, my sister and one of her good friends growing up. It's always hard to find a character at first, and it helps if you can sort of relate them to somebody that you know well.
Right.
And of course, there's huge differences between Chris Wiley and my actual sister. But the way she reacts to situations, her personality, there was a lot of inspiration there. So it was kind of fun. I hear a lot of writers borrow from the people in their lives a little bit.
Yeah. Well, what interested me was the fact when I was looking in your website, and I love your website. Whoever designed it, they did a beautiful job. And because I look at a lot of them and I love when I see, different stuff, and yours is really cool. And when I looked at your bio, I mean, you're an engineer, okay? And I always think it's funny because I'm 53, right? Now, back in the day, you're younger than me, but back in the day, there was a kind of a joke among people my age that, like, don't date an engineer because they're the boringest people in the whole world. Like,
Yeah.
Like that was just the, like lawyer, yes, doctor, yeah, engineer, no, stay away from the engineers,
Their life reads like stereo instructions, right? They're
Yes.
supposed to be so square, they have corners. And, that stereotype persists to this day. I worked in an architecture office for a year, and there was just sort of like a running joke among the architects that we couldn't think creatively outside of a paper box. Like there was no way to get an engineer to solve a problem in a new, interesting way. So, I don't feel like that describes a lot of the engineers I knew, but it's not like, yeah, people still feel that way. And it's funny, I'll meet engineers that are readers, and they're always surprised to find out my background.
Yes.
Because a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, my brother's an engineer, and you're not like him at all. So, fortunately, in historic preservation and environmental engineering, those are two fields of civil engineering that I know a lot of people in and I've worked in. They attract more women. They attract more creative types. It's not all computer programmers, So my work as an engineer actually got me into the back rooms, the service corridors, the loading docks, the rooftops, all the dark, dirty places in every building. And I got a chance to work with all these contractors who, blue collar, down to earth, really smart, really practical, really pragmatic people that, I never would have had a chance to meet or work closely with if I hadn't gone into engineering. So it really was a bizarre sort of, but good training into writing these types of mysteries.
Yeah, what made you pick that over any? I mean, you could take a historical fiction, like you could have written this, like anything, because it's set in Cleveland, so you could have found any kind of like cool Cleveland historical fiction, but you find this like mysterious set of murders that have never been solved, and it's like she could have just taken a cute little Cleveland story and written about it, but
It's interesting. I actually bring it back to my first book, The Dead Key, and I can give you the cover to that one right here. My first book, The Dead Key, that came out 3 years ago. It was inspired by my work as an engineer. I was working in this old bank that had been abandoned and sat empty and vacant for years, and it had this vault full of safe deposit boxes in the basement. And the boxes were still closed and locked, and there were still deposits in them when I came along to do my work. And I think it's a good litmus test for what kind of writer you want to be. You ask somebody the question of, okay, you have a vault filled with mysterious safe deposits in these boxes locked away for a decade. What's in the boxes? And I think a romance writer would see lost love letters and engagement rings and birth certificates and, family drama, wills and things. I saw dead bodies. Like I saw I saw murder. I saw crime. I wrote this book to solve this mystery of what the heck was in those boxes because I wanted to know. But I was convinced it was some very seedy conspiracy cover-up story involving the city and bribery and murder. That's where my brain goes. So it's a good test to see what kind of writer you want to be, is what would you put in those boxes? And so for me, I had buried treasure and I had missing evidence and I had all these crimes. And for whatever reason, those are the types of stories that really appeal to me. I grew up reading Stephen King and John Saul and V.C. Andrews and a bunch of other stuff too. I mean, I loved Jack London. I loved Tolkien. I loved all kinds of books. I read constantly, but the stories that really stuck with me were the ones that had some deep, dark secret buried inside. I grew up in a small town where it seemed like everybody must be hiding something because it was so boring. There was no other explanation. And I was always looking for the seedy underbelly, like the stuff that people wouldn't tell you, the things that were lurking in their basements. So that's the kind of stories that I get excited about. And with the Unclaimed Victim, I was really inspired by another building, this huge behemoth old abandoned factory that they turned into condos in the last decade down in near the flats of Cleveland in Tremont. And this beautiful old crazy building is really 15 buildings smashed together.
Wow.
It was built over the course of 40 years. Well, really more like 140 years, but from 1907 to 1950, they were adding on whenever they had money. And it ended up being 15 buildings, 175,000 square feet of twisting, winding corridors and doors that opened into 10-foot drops and all kinds of stuff. And I'd been obsessed with this building since the late 90s when it was empty and vacant and there were homeless people squatting inside it. And I would walk by this building when I was out taking a stroll through the neighborhood, and I wanted to know who these homeless people were. And I also wanted to know about the missionaries that used to live there. At one point, there were supposed to be over 200 of these nuns that they called Sallies, these Mennonite missionary women living there. And it looked kind of like a prison. And it also looked like a factory. And then parts of it also looked like a church. And it looked like it had a lot of terrible secrets. And I knew that I wanted to write a mystery about it. But then I read Devil in the White City, which is one of my favorite books, about H.H. Holmes and his killings that were done in Chicago at the turn of the century, around 1901. H.H. Holmes builds this crazy death trap of a hotel. And if you haven't read Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, I highly recommend it. It's a true crime story of one of America's very first serial killers. And H.H. Holmes built his hotel as a death trap. Like there were secret passageways and doorways and chutes. And he would get these young girls coming in from the countryside to work the World's Fair. And he would catch them and trap them. And he'd be able to get into their rooms and throw their bodies down chutes. And he had torture chambers and all kinds of stuff. So reading that book and looking at this crazy factory, I knew that I wanted a killer. And in this story, some sort of killer. And so I started looking through Cleveland history for a killer. And the torso killer, if you look at the 1930s, in
Right.
20s and 30s in Cleveland, that's the most notorious unsolved set of murders in our history to this day, most likely. I mean, they found Solwell. They found, that there's been other horrible crimes, but this type of scale, 13 dead bodies in real life, unsolved to this day. It really was all over the headlines for a long time. And every time a body would turn up in Cleveland, like into the 70s, they would compare it to the torso killings. And it was a little intimidating because a lot's been written about the torso killings. And if you go into the the author's notes in the back, there'll be all this additional reading if you want to read more of the true crime story. But I decided that there was a little bit that hadn't been told about this killer. Even though many books have been written, I felt like the story of the victims and the story of maybe one that got away had never really been talked about. Like the victims were always described in these stories. If you look at detective fiction in general, especially serial killer fiction, the victims almost become like objects. Like they're sort of pieces of a puzzle. You don't look at them as people. And I wanted to look at some of these victims as people because only 3 of 13 bodies were ever identified.
Yeah, I looked it up on. I looked it up because I was curious myself, in prep for this, and I was like shocked at all the John and Jane Does. It's
tragic. Yeah, it was really tragic. It was a sign of the times. I mean, the Great Depression is another piece of the mystery that I feel like kind of doesn't take as much of a center stage in some of these stories as perhaps it should, because it really was the backdrop for these killings. There were so many homeless people, so many people destitute, so many people desperate in the 1930s in Cleveland. As we were struggling with the Great Depression, there were labor strikes every week. They were bringing in the National Guard. There was, people hopping the trains and going from city to city to look for work. And one of the theories as to we weren't able to identify the bodies is because they might not have been local. I mean, a lot of, especially the male victims, they suspected were hobos that had come in from St. Louis or Boston or somewhere else. So, but it's kind of unbelievable, the idea that 10 people could just disappear, and never even identify the remains. I mean, it's just it really kind of pulled at my heartstrings. I mean, Jack the Ripper type stories are always fascinating. If you see the movie Zodiac, you'll get a taste of like how obsessed you can become when you're researching one of these serial killer cases that are unsolved. It's like every little piece of evidence you have to dig into, and it becomes like rabbit hole after rabbit hole things to research. But the human part really kind of was the thing that stuck with me more so than sort of the game of can you solve the crime.
Well, I always think about when you guys write timeline books, like to make them make sense, must require a lot of outlining or a lot of planning because because you have two stories going, and I'm telling you, like, I would be like on the one story, I'm like, no, I need more, and then to know when to cut that at the right spot, to me, that seems like a very difficult thing to do in the editing process.
Well, I think one of the benefits I've had being a non-traditionally trained writer, in fact, I'm not really a trained writer at all, I consider myself more of an outsider, is that I'm not burdened down with a lot of knowledge as to like what I'm doing. Ignorance is bliss. Honestly, like I kind of write by instinct. I've always been a lover of stories. I think we all consume stories, multiple stories every day. We got TV, you've got movies, you've got books, and then you've got just the stories you tell each other, the jokes, the anecdotes from the day, the story about the delivery guy. And I think that there is there's an instinctual aspect to telling a story that even lay people that will never write understand. Like, you don't bury the lead. You don't give away the big surprise till the end. There's certain things you shouldn't do. But it's funny, I'm working on my 4th book, and I know more now than I ever have before about this writing. And I've read books on writing, and I've given even some workshops on writing. And so I'm thinking about the mechanics of it a lot more than I ever have. And it actually sometimes makes it tougher because you become suddenly very aware of all these choices you're making.
Yeah.
And you really have like time to contemplate them and think about them. And that doesn't always make it easier. For me, I don't outline when I'm writing. Mm-hmm. I do very much I try to follow the story. I don't really have an exact plan of where it's going. And I don't outline or do any storyboarding until I have a first draft. And then I do put it up. I actually put the storyboard up on my radiator cover in my hallway. It's a great big cover, and I live in a little house. It's an old 100-year-old house. So I had to find a free wall. And so I just taped up all the little chapters, and I was able to see it all at once and figure out where my holes were. But I don't do that typically when I'm trying to get the story out, because for me, when you're trying to set the scene and you're trying to create a story, I like open-mindedness. Like I like to keep all the possibilities at my fingertips, to have an exact roadmap that I feel like I have to follow. I've never found that helpful.
Right. Well, I just want to read to everyone the opening of this book. Okay?
Okay.
You already know it, but, I wrote it down because this is how you know, like, what kind of journey you were on. When I read this, I was like, oh, okay. He who fights with monsters might take care, lest he thereby become a monster. And when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. Which is Friedrich Nietzsche, for anyone. But I have recognized it right away, and I was like, oh, wow, this is going to be really cool, And like I said, thrillers are not usually my thing because I get so emotionally attached to people, to characters. But I just, I loved it. And like I said, I had to keep taking breaks, but I kept going back and being like, okay, I'm ready. Bring it on. I can do this.
I'm so glad you did. Yeah, my mother is always my litmus test if I've gone too far in the creepy, scary area, because she doesn't like scary books. She doesn't like sad books. She likes happy ending books.
Yep.
My work is always a little more challenging for her because sometimes things are left a little open-ended. But I asked her, I'm like, Mom, was this too scary? Was it too gross? Was it too much? And she's like, no, I liked it. She's like, there were moments where I was really nervous that it was going to go over the line, but she's like, it never did. So
Aww.
which is good because, like I said, she really doesn't like those tough stories. So when you're writing a story about a serial killer, there's a lot of opportunity to go too far.
Yes.
And I really hope that I just went up to the line, but not over, because I don't like things that are gross and gory for their own sake. Like, I was more interested in the
story,
in the story and like the human side of it, and how, you know, the instinct to kill isn't that foreign to people. Like, I feel like, you know, if you look at human history, most of us do have the capacity to kill in the right circumstances. And I remember writing parts of this book thinking about what would drive me to kill somebody. And I've got 2 kids. So right there, it's like, I do have that mama bear instinct where I could think of a situation where I would absolutely kill another person. And it's a weird place to be. Like, my kids were like kind of weary of me. Like, the whole time I was writing those sections, they're like, Mom, are you okay? Because I was kind of walking around a little psycho. I know. I was like, I'm just thinking of rage and anger, and
I'm just writing some things
and killing. I'm thinking about killing today.
Right, and you're so inspirational because there are a lot of women out there that have children and they're stay-at-home moms, and I'm finding more and more of you guys. I mean, I'm inspired to talk to you because I have 6 children, and most of them are raised, but I couldn't do anything. I was like, that's all I did. You know?
Well, 6 children, girl, that's 3 jobs as far as I'm concerned.
I did homeschool most of it. I did homeschooled all of them, but at different times. But anyway, it's really inspirational to read that, because people can. I always tell my daughters, and my one daughter does have 2 little boys, and I'm like, you know, find something for you. You know, they're just about, the one is in preschool, the other one's a toddler, and I'm like, you know, it goes so fast. So fast. You wake up and they're in school, and, you know, just find something that you enjoy doing. And I think that, you know, it keeps you grounded and like outside, because as my kids started growing up, I was like, oh, who am I without them? Like, you can't leave because I only know what to do with you.
Well, I saw my own mom go through that. She was a stay-at-home mom with 3 kids. And, you know, I worked before having kids. I worked while having kids. I was a part-time engineer for several years until it got to be just too much, and I left. And I started my own business, so I was still doing engineering for a while. I found I like a balance between being with the kids and work. I think it is important to keep something for yourself as you raise children, because you don't get to keep them. You don't get to hold on to them. They're not yours. You know, you're just there helping them along, and then they're gone. And I've got 2 boys, so they're 8 and 11, and they're really getting very independent. And I'm really glad that I found something of my own, because I think it's also good for them to see that, you know, I'm a person too, that I have things that I'm accomplishing. They have to write short stories and things for school, and they've been able to bring me into class to talk about being a writer. And I feel like it's nice for them to see that there's more to me than just, you know, being a mom for them. It also, my husband is more active doing things with the boys, so we share some of the parenting roles, and it's, I think it's good for the kids. I really do. And it's certainly better for me, because they're going to be gone, and I need to keep myself going. I got to find things that I like to do.
Yeah, so at this point, you know, my older children that I told you help me with this, it's kind of like, oh, Mom's doing this cute little thing where she talks to authors. So,
but it's great. Because, you know, you've gotta find your niche. And I think it's a good lesson for any kid. I mean, there's so much pressure now for these kids to get these perfect grades and do these perfect things. And I love that they can see me working. I love that they can see that there's all kinds of work, that, you know, that you can pursue your dreams, that some things work out and some things don't. I mean, I think it helps them as they're trying to figure out where to go with themselves. Yes. And I also think it's healthy that they know the world doesn't revolve just around them. And which I'm glad for, because I want them to realize that they they're responsible for a lot of their own life themselves, and that they need, I'm here for them, but I expect them to keep moving and do what they need to do.
Exactly. So you were talking about your fourth book. Can you tell us anything
Yes.
about it?
Oh gosh, well, it's still very much in the globby, lumpy clay phase. Like I'm about halfway through. I think I've got about 40,000 words. It's set in Shaker Heights, which is a suburb of Cleveland, filled with a lot of bizarre old history and beautiful old houses. It's set in a 100-year-old house where there's been a murder. It's based on a true place. There was a murder in Shaker Heights in 1931 that a mother slashed the throat of her son and then attempted suicide. And I'm fascinated that the house is still standing, that there are people living in it. And just the idea of living in an old house, as I do. My house is 100 years old this year. You're walking in other people's footsteps constantly, and it's a theme that you'll find in all my work. This idea that the past is alive and it's around you, and it's what's that?
Yeah, no, it's right there. I lived in a house that was 100 years old too, and it's weird.
Yeah.
Because right now I'm in a new house, but my old house, you definitely didn't feel alone when you were alone. Like you felt like there were things, and there had a lot of closets and attics, and you were like, what did they put in here? What is it? It's different. It really is. I don't know how to explain it. It's a different feel. It really is.
Yeah, I feel like these houses have sort of a memory. So I'm writing a story of multiple timelines involving this house. And there were several murders in Shaker throughout the years around the exact same location. And the setting of the house is very close to this ring of trees where the old Shakers, this religious cult, basically,
I heard of them.
They were the Shaking Quakers, and they had all sorts of bizarre mysticism about them. They were celibate. They were kind of almost like Amish in some of their some of their little cultural things, but they believed they could speak to the dead inside this ring of trees.
That's so cool.
I'm very fascinated by this. I'm still tying it all together. I'm just writing lots of different times, and I've got my characters, but I've got to figure out how it's all going to come together. It's actually pretty exciting because every time I'm writing and something new comes up, like right now I have a gun that ended up getting found, and I'm like, ooh, this is going to become a really critical part of this story. But I didn't know it was going to be there. So it's kind of a fun discovery journey for me as I'm going through and writing.
Well, I love talking to you because I can see how much fun it is for you. And I love when, because when you have fun, it comes out in the books, and I can see that you just love telling these stories. And I can't wait to read it. And I'm like, oh my God, that sounds so cool. But I know she's going to make it like so scary, but that's okay. I can do it. Because I'd love to read it. I can't wait. Do you have a date that you have to have it? Like, are you on deadline or anything?
Yeah, my dog is barking in the corner.
That's okay.
Yes, I'm supposed to have something in to my editor in the spring. I think that I have to have a finished manuscript by summer.
Okay.
So I feel like I'm about a month behind, but the good news is once it gets going, things can move pretty quickly.
And it's the holidays,
It's the holidays. My kids are going to be home from school. This next 2 weeks, I'm getting a lot done. So far, this week's been really good. It's not a linear process. It's not like you write the same amount every day, or that each chapter takes the same amount of time. I did over 8 months of research on this one, and so it's coming. I'm excited, and it's been great talking to you. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you, dear. I want to show them the cover. I want to see if I can pull it up again, but you can show your book cover. Maybe that'd be easier to see.
Is this coming out backwards on?
No, it is actually, to me, it's not. So
yeah,
I'm going to assume that it's not.
Me.
Yeah, because I just want them to see. I mean, it is a very, very cool cover, and they will understand when you read it. So we aren't going to tell you why you will love it. We're just going to tell you that you will love it. So, well, I will have all of Dee's links underneath here, so you can find her on her Amazon and every other social media that she's on, and you can get her book. And thank you so much. I can't wait for your next one. Please keep in touch. I'll be hooked up to you through social media, so I'm sure I'll see it. But thank you, and have a great holiday.
Yes, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone.
Yes, you too. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Was she not fun? wasn't she the best? I loved interviewing her. I am so happy that I got to meet her, and I loved hearing about her crazy stories with this research of the book. And I can't wait. She's writing a fourth one, and even though this one was hard for me because it was so scary, when she was talking about the fourth book, I was thinking right away, like, maybe I want to read that. That sounds really good. I think I can get through it. If I can get through this one, I can get through another one. And, who knows? Who knows where thrillers are going to go for me? But anyway, hers are just great. You guys need to look her up and look up her website. And that was her third book. She's writing her fourth. It'll be out next year. And I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I do, and as much as I did. And if you liked the video, please hit like if you made it this far. So thank you for watching. Bye.